Good afternoon. Some of you probably came to this talk, the last one of the day, because you thought, you could chill. But I know what it's like in the late afternoon, and so there's going to be very little chill opportunity in this talk, just so you know. Yeah. So we're here to talk about improving and extending your retrospective outcomes. Yay, yeah. So how many of you participate in retrospectives? Okay. Leave your hand up if you also lead retrospectives. Oh, okay, good. This will be fun. So I'm Diana Larsen, and I've been involved in the Agile community for quite some time. I am, surprisingly to myself, I have discovered that I am a model builder. I find models to be useful, though sometimes wrong, as George Box has instructed us. But I do find them to be useful, and so. Over my career, I've built a few models. Most of them are represented up here. The one we're going to be talking about today comes out of this book. I will be tomorrow you can come and buy a book place, wherever that is. So I only brought a few with me, but if you're interested and you don't already have one, and you want one that's got a name in it, you can come and see me then. So this is what we're going to be talking about today. We'll maybe get to some of the others later. So for those of you who don't know or are new to retrospectives, Agile retrospectives are different from a standard lessons learned, post-mortem, after-action review, ad hoc examination. I've heard them called various things, project reviews. In that, we looked at all those things, and all those things are useful when you get to the end of a piece of work. But of course, in the Agile world, we work differently. We think about iterative, and we think about incremental. And when Esther and I were looking at the manifesto right after it was published, we said, so where is the practice that describes how the team reflects, tunes, and adjusts at regular intervals, like it says in the principles, the 12 principles? And we said, we didn't see one. Crystal had a reflection meeting, but that was the closest that we could find. And we said, you know what, people are going to struggle with this if we don't have some kind of defined way of doing it. So we began writing the book. And the first thing that we heard when we told people we were writing the book is, how can you possibly write a book about retrospectives? It's only 2 questions. Right? Well, so we disagreed and we wrote a book anyway. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And how do you make sure that you get the last part of this, the future part? We all had some experience of what the last iteration or sprint or Kanban period of time was like. We can all talk about that in the present and share our perceptions of that experience, but how really do we affect the future? And that is the tricky bit, of course. Because if we aren't affecting the future, then that meeting is probably waste. And in fact, teams that have moved to a format of mob programming, which a number of my friends are doing these days, they have very, very tiny, short retrospectives at the end of every day, and they don't hold big retrospective meetings. except maybe once in a great while, to kind of think about the overall patterns that they're seeing. So we want to make sure that on whatever cadence we are holding our retrospectives, that is actually a useful period of time for the team. So in our book, we thought about how we did retrospectives that seemed to be useful to folks. And Esther and I came up with this model. And actually, it's the part that's right above my head that is the retrospective part. This part is the work we just did part. And it's on a kind of a continuous cycle. We do some work, we stop and hold a retrospective on that work, we look to incorporate the improvements, and we do some more work, and we hold another retrospective, and we do some more work, and so on. Until we stop, right? Until we stop the whole thing. So this has been, we described this because we found that it was a flexible framework and a scalable framework. I have used this set the stage, gather data, generate insights, decide what to do, and close the retrospective on retrospectives that lasted 20 minutes and retrospectives that lasted 4 days and everything in between. The activities change. The group processes that I design in change depending on a number of factors. How many people are involved, how long a time we're looking at, was there any conflict or controversy, were there any big changes that went on in the team's environment. All of those things make a difference. All of those things make a difference. All of those things help to dictate how long we spend in the retrospective, whether we hold it in the team room or off-site somewhere. We take all of that into consideration as we design a retrospective. At this point, depending on how long the retrospective is going to be, it takes me about 2/3 that amount of time to design the retrospective. In the beginning, what people tell me is it takes about twice as much time. So over time, as you do this a lot, you gain some facility with it, and it doesn't take quite as long. But it always does take some attention. Because if you're doing your retrospective or leading your retrospective in exactly the same way every time, that is likely to give you diminishing returns, largely because it gets boring. So humans like variety. So we try to build variety into our retrospectives, right? So the part that I'm going to really focus on today, we're going to do a couple of things, is this part, the gather data, generate insights, decide what to do, because as it turns out, that shows up, that similar kind of format shows up in a lot of places. So if you think about the lean startup build, measure, learn cycle, right? There's some similarities there. If you think about plan, do, check, act, there are some similarities there in the checking. And most recently, there are some similarities in the world of complex adaptive systems and how we deal with complex adaptive systems. And that's what teams are, because they're made up of humans. And it's not possible to always predict how things are going to go, no matter how good of process controls we set up. Humans are not machines, so they do not perform in exactly the same way every single time. That makes their situation complex. And even humans lend themselves to complex adaptive systems because they will even take actions and enact behaviors that are counter to their own best interest. So that makes it really hard to predict what's going to happen next. Right? So the adaptive action cycle, this comes from the Human Systems Dynamics Institute, actually this model, is called what, so what, now what? So if you don't want, like, gather data, generate insights, decide what to do, you can always substitute what, so what, now what, right? What means, what did we just experience? What was that like? Let's learn more about that. Let's make sure that we all have the same perspective on it. If in a 2-week sprint, if I was sick for 2 days, I may have had a very different experience of that sprint than you did who was there every single day. Or somebody who got pulled out for a bunch of meetings will have had a very different experience from somebody who was able to work straight through. Right? So we want to pull all that together to make sure we understand what the totality of the team experience was before we start making any choices about that. So that's the what. Let's make sure we really understand what we're talking about. The so what is, what does that mean for us? What are the implications? What insights can we gather? What is our analysis of what that might mean for us? So what? Right? And then now what is, what action does that tell us we need to take? And how are we going to design that action? Are we going to experiment with a hypothesis, or do we already kind of know that this is the thing we want to do next? So all those choices in terms of now what? And so we pay attention to that, and then at the end of the next iteration, whatever that experience was becomes grist for the mill, right? Gets incorporated into our next retrospective, and we keep that rolling along. So we begin with setting the stage, and setting the stage is, there, that's the one. What I need for you to do before we get going is to form some small groups. So, and our videographer gives us the information that if you form those small groups closer to the front of the room, it's better for him, okay? So just now you have that data. So, groups of 4. It's the end of the day. Feel free to move the chairs around. All right? Get comfy. When you can hear my voice, raise your hand and stop talking. Okay, thank you. So that was out of a request to not use the bells. Do you like the hand raising or the bells better, Chad? I like the hand raising. You like the hand raising, okay. So anybody have a problem with the hand raising? No, okay. So where was I? Setting the stage. So that adaptive action cycle, that what, so what, now what, in this framework is bracketed by 2 basically facilitation techniques. The first one is setting the stage. And what that means is that people rarely are able to just walk in a room and start whatever the work is. We all need sort of a transition time. And setting the stage helps folks make that transition. It's also your opportunity to show them the agenda, to tell them how you're going to use their time. I mean, if for a 1 or 2 week retrospective with a team of 6-ish, 7-ish people, you're probably going to need at least 75 minutes to get to any kind of substantive results. People processing time, it just takes that long, right? Half-hour retrospectives are a waste of time, in general. if you're talking about a couple of weeks worth of work. So I'm going to put a number of stakes in the ground like that. And I know that for a number of you, your organization or your product owner or somebody may be telling you, well, all we can really afford is a half-hour retrospective, and at which point you look them in the eye and say, that doesn't give us any kind of results, right? And then you move forward. So longer periods of time, more people, greater controversy, all of those begin to extend the amount of time you need to spend in a retrospective. But just know 75 minutes is the absolute bare minimum. I have tried many times to do 1-hour retrospectives. I am very experienced at doing retrospectives. I cannot get a group to really results that really make a difference for them. I mean, they can have some conversations, and that's kind of good sometimes, but really getting to improvement results takes that minimum of 75 minutes. So people are wondering how you're going to spend their 75 minutes or their 90 minutes or their 2 hours of time that they could be working on building more code, which, you know, they may be building some, well, we know they're building debt in. There's just no question, right? So they could be doing that, or they're here. So how are we going to make this valuable? So we need to let them know that. So we give them an agenda, and we say, here's how we're going to use your time. Here's what we're going to focus on in this meeting. Always saying your meeting is about continuous improvement is a really bad idea. That is way too big a topic. That's a week-long topic, right? You've only got 75 minutes or 90 minutes. So give it a focus and then let the group know what that focus is. This time we're going to talk about the promises we made to ourselves about engineering practices and whether or not we're still doing those. This time we're going to talk about our teamwork. How are we getting along during the week? What adjustments do we need to make there? This time we're going to talk about our relationship with our product owner or our end user customer, or what the feedback was that we just got in our last 2 product demos, right? You don't want to make it so narrow as to seem like you're constraining the outcomes, but you want to make it narrow enough that you've got something to talk about in a focused way in 75 minutes. Yeah.
I imagine in order to be able to do that means that you would have to have been paying attention over the interval. A lot is going on, a lot was important before you get to this point?
Yes.
Some magical way other than that.
Yes. And so if the Scrum Master or Agile coach is leading, presumably they have been sort of maintaining that sort of more overarching view of what's been going on in the team, and they have some good ideas. If it's somebody from the outside, in a number of organizations where we've gone in and done training in leading retrospectives of a cohort of project managers or scrum masters or coaches or whatever, sometimes they will lead each other's, which means they have to do a little more investigation before they show up to figure it out. Experienced teams who have had a lot of good retrospectives, of effective retrospectives, will begin to suggest topics, which is even better. But yes, so in setting the stage, you're going to tell them about what the focus is, you're going to tell them how you're going to use their time, and you're probably going to do some kind of very short, small activity to help them just kind of get their head in the room. Right? To let go of what it was they were thinking about before they showed up and really be able to focus on the work of the team right now. So, in your group, just go around the circle, say one word to describe what you expect from this session. Go. This should not take very long. Hyphenated words are acceptable, if you can justify the hyphen. Okay. So we're going to do this next bit really fast. And I don't think you'll have time to get around with the microphone. So using your outdoor voices, projecting, just a few people tell me what was your one word? What was one word here? Food. Food. Pardon? Oh, okay. One word. Learn. Handshake? Fullness. Okay. Handshakefulness. Yeah, okay. Back there. Experience. Expedience or experience? Experience, okay. Okay, over here? Help, okay. So, one word. Now we all have some sense of what the expectations are in this room, and it helps to focus. So then we move on to gathering data, the what. This is so that everybody has a sense of what the totality of the shared experience is. This is where you'll see activities like timelines, or there's one that I developed called FRIM, which is what happened, put it on sticky notes, arrange them on a grid that is how often did that happen? Did it happen once? Did it happen continuously, kind of on a continuum? And what was the impact on our team? Was it a positive impact or a negative impact, right? But something that visualizes our experience of this period of time we just spent together working. There's many, many examples of that. We're not going to be going through a lot of those. Then from the data that you have gathered, you move on to generating insights. How do we make sense of that? And I have a little way for us to do that. Fun. Okay. So busy trying to get my clicker to work beforehand that I didn't get this set up. So send a representative of your group here and grab a cube. A cube. Single cube. Thank you. Yeah, just grab a cube. I think there'll be enough there. Oops. Let's keep this. Okay, generating insights, it's now that we know what our experience was, how do we make meaning of that? It's the analysis. If the gathering data was the learning part, this is the thinking together part, right? This is the, so now that we learned about what we just did, and we learned about what everybody thinks about that, what do we think about that? Let's analyze it. So, going around your circle, take a story cube, roll it, see what comes up on top, and tell your group something about how that relates to your conference experience so far. When you have all reported how the story cube reflects your conference experience, have a quick discussion about how do all those stories of your experiences influence what else might happen during this conference. So we're at the midpoint here, doing a little retrospective on your conference experience. How can you improve tomorrow? Right? What are some ways? When you can hear my voice, finish your sentence and then raise your hand. Okay, great. All right, generating some insights, understanding the data a bit, and then generating some insights. Okay, so now we move on to deciding what to do. This is the meat. If we have spent a good amount of time on the data gathering and the insights, usually deciding what to do goes pretty quickly. And this is the part that people often fear of retrospectives. How will we possibly make a group decision, right? If you've done a good job of describing the common experience and a good job of saying, well, how does that, what is the meaning of that for us? The decision about action items becomes a lot easier. And there are a bunch of techniques for that. I don't believe that every team needs to make consensus decisions all the time. I'm actually right now very fond of the idea of consent decisions that come out of sociocracy and holacracy, which was born somewhere around here, holacracy. Sociocracy was born across the ocean. But also sometimes voting works, right? Sometimes voting works. Sometimes flipping a coin works. That's an important perspective for your coach or scrum master to bring to the team about how do you know what kinds of decisions are needed when. And that's a facilitation skill. And all of this has to do with whoever is leading the retrospectives developing facilitation skill, right? All right, so in this part, you are actually going to, you're going to make a decision that everybody in the group can support and move forward with, that has had enough input into the discussion that they feel bought in, right? So, in this third round in your groups, say what action you will take to ensure that you'll take tomorrow to ensure that this conference will be very valuable to you by the time you walk away. You'll get maximum value out of the time you've spent. And then how can you support each other in making sure those actions happen? Right? That's maybe the trickier part of this one. Right? Okay, so go. And you can hear my voice. Okay. So in deciding what to do, you've figured out what action you're going to take, right? But sometimes that action needs reinforcement. So in closing the retrospective, we generally reiterate that action. This is, depending on the team I'm working with, this is when I will have them write that action as a story on a card that they can carry into the planning meeting. Very often the retrospective comes in between product demo or product review and planning for the next increment, iteration or sprint, whatever you call it. And so we want to make sure that this action gets considered as part of the work. It is a little bit like you're cleaning up your teamwork debt, right? This is important work to do as well. So just like you make time for refactoring, of course you do, every time you finish a task, write a story, you make sure you clean up that design. At the end of every iteration, you're going to clean up some part of your teamwork, right? So it is important work. It will help you go faster, right, if you keep your teamwork clean. So it belongs in the regular work backlog. I always get a queasy feeling when I go into a team where somebody says, well, here's our work backlog, our sprint backlog, and over here is our improvement backlog. And then my question always is, how often do you look at that improvement backlog? And the answer is 98% of the time, never, right? So cataloging possible improvements is not the same as actually improving. We often think that if we put something on a list, that means that magically something will happen, but without action, it doesn't. So in closing the retrospective, we reiterate the action by ensuring that it's going to get incorporated into the next piece of work. We thank each other. Sometimes this is often a time when people do an activity called offer appreciations. That can be done at the beginning or the end. We look at the retrospective and we say, did we do a good job of this retrospective? Is there any way we could improve our future retrospectives so that they're more useful to us? So those are all the things that we do. In essence, closing the retrospective is sort of tying the meeting up with a bow, right? Because the next piece of work, which is planning, is going to be very different from this work, and you need to demark them. You need to give people a break time before you go into the next piece of work, right? This is its own meeting, and it needs to be marked off with a beginning and an end, and that's what closing the retrospective is. So, in your groups, reiterate the actions that you're planning to take, and thank everybody. Yeah. So, the point being that this needs to be a time that is useful to you. So, we've just done a quasi-retrospective. You aren't on permanent or even temporary teams together, except very, very temporary, just for the last half hour. And you haven't really done work together. We talked more about how each of you is managing the conference. So this wasn't necessarily a sincere replication of what you'll have on your teams. But I have a question. So how many of you, now that we have ended, feel more drained than you did when we started this? Okay, a couple of you folks, okay. How many of you feel a little more energy than you had when you walked in? Okay, that's a measure, right? If at the end of your retrospectives, people are feeling eager to get going on the next sprint, you've had an effective retrospective. If most of the team is kind of drained or depressed at the end of your retrospective, then there's probably something that you want to tune there, right? So you can each think about, what your past experience of retrospectives has been. Think about that. This is an activity that we sometimes do at the end of retrospectives, particularly when we've had a retrospective where the focus was, how are we doing on our retrospectives, right? Which sometimes teams need every once in a while. Oops, okay. Yes? Could I use what for any meeting? Return on, absolutely, yeah. It was funny. I was at a QCon, I think it was, in London a few years ago. And there was a reception one evening, and this young man came up and said, you may not remember me, but I was in your workshop last year in some other conference. And I've been applying the retrospective framework and doing those things in my retrospectives. He says, and I figured out the secret. And I thought, oh, so what's the secret? What's the secret? I didn't know there was a secret. I thought, kind of what you see is what you get. But anyway, he said, I figured out the secret. When your retrospectives get better, all your other meetings get better too. Because these are ways of helping groups to think, to learn, think, and make decisions together. And that happens in a lot of meetings, not just in retrospectives. But it can be a little crucible for making sure that kind of improvement is happening, and then that begins to have an effect on all the other meetings that you have. People are more tuned to what a good meeting feels like, and they start expecting that from their other meetings. So making sure that what are some ways that we can make sure that what comes out of our retrospective actually does get incorporated into our work, and that we actually do see some improvement, that we could actually point to some ways in which the team has improved as we go on. So one of them I already mentioned. Make sure that it becomes a part of the real work, right? What's another one? Yeah.
Review the results for the next retrospective.
It's a part of the next what? Right? When you're gathering your data in your next retrospective, make sure you bring in what your findings were in the last one and whether or not you followed through on those actions. Now, I have seen teams go 2 or 3 retrospectives reporting, oh, we didn't actually, but that becomes so embarrassing after a while that it turns around, right? It turns around. What else? What else might we do to ensure that that happens, that those improvement actions actually occur?
Keep reminders of them visible where everyone can see them all the time.
Absolutely, yeah. Visualizing the work. Visualizing the cleaning up the teamwork like we visualize our other work, right? What else? Who else has an idea? Yeah.
Putting them on the sprint backlog and not the improvement backlog. It doesn't get looked
Yeah.
at.
Yeah, making sure that they're right there, yeah. They're a part of our real work, yeah. Any others? Yeah, okay.
Make someone who's not the PM or the Scrum Master responsible for being the stakeholder of that change.
Yeah. One of the activities that I do, and it's on our Future Works blog, so there's a write-up that you can go find. It's not in the book, because we figured it out afterwards. But we call it EIEC, right? And we list the improvement actions that we are going to do. Actually, it's a way of helping the team decide, but then it also has the impact that we were just talking about. And we talk about, well, we have this, these many possible actions we could take. The first E is effort. How much of the team's bandwidth do we think this is going to take? The second, the I stands for impact. Where do we think we're going to get the most benefit? Which of these things would give us the most benefit if we do it? The second E, the third letter, the third column, is where's our energy? Who really has enthusiasm for taking this on? When impact and energy are at odds, which do you suppose we go with? The energy, right. We will take a less impactful action that we have the energy to complete over something we think is abstractly more important, but nobody has any energy for, right? That increases the chance that we will actually follow through on it. And after we followed through on a number of things, we will begin to go after those maybe heavier weight, more impactful things. Yeah.
So when I run these retrospectives, I often find that we get to the end, we get tasks, and we get consensus on them. And I like the idea of energy, but usually what it boils down to is me saying, okay, who's going to own this task? And somebody being like,
Right.
All right, I'll do it. Right?
Yeah,
Or
well,
I'll
and
just
that's the C, right? The
Yeah.
E, I, E, and then C is
But I
who's
guess-
going to follow through with this.
So I am pretty good at getting somebody to follow through on it,
Yeah.
but I don't have a good measure of what the energy or enthusiasm is.
Right.
Or if somebody's just like, all right, I want this meeting to end, so I'll volunteer.
Yeah.
So what do you suggest for that?
Well,
Engaging it.
so I would eliminate the phrase, I'm going to get someone to, from my vocabulary, right? And I just ask. Because if we're picking the thing that has the highest amount of energy in the room, somebody's going to have enough energy to step forward and just take it. I usually don't have to encourage very much. I'll just say, you know, if you want to improve in this area, who's going to take this on, right? Yes, and we limit the actions to 2 small ones or 1 big one, right? Because we have a product owner and we are going to put this on our sprint backlog and we want them to feel friendly toward us. So if we load up our backlog with a lot of improvement actions, first, they're probably not going to happen, and second, we're not going to get much work done if they do. So that doesn't really serve. Taking small bites. And of course, we're doing this on a rapid turnaround. You know, we have the opportunity every 1 or 2 weeks to do something new to improve. So we don't have to take it all on at once. We only have to take on the 1 or 2 small next things that we think are going to give us a good impact, that we have the bandwidth to do, and that we have some enthusiasm for. Pardon? Commitment. Yeah. So then the last column is commitment. And not only do I ask someone who's willing to commit, but then I ask who's willing to back them up. So if something happens to that person, we're not at a truck factor of 1, right? We've got a higher truck factor on this particular thing. It gives it a better chance of getting the follow-through, right? Okay, but we have to have a plan for this, right? It's not enough to just make a list or put a thing up. We have to actually think about how are we going to follow through. So, all of these, I said that there's lots of opportunities, lots of group processes you're going to want to put together to make this retrospective engaging and interesting for the people who are involved in it. There are many, many resources for you. These are only the website resources, and only actually a selected list of those. There are books. In addition to, for a long time, Esther's and my book was the only one that was really about sort of iteration retrospectives. And in the last couple of years, there have actually been several that have been published. So there's Patrick Kua's Retrospective Handbook. There's Ben Linder and Luis Gonsalves Getting Value Out of Your Retrospectives. There's actually, I know another person in India that I just met who's working on another book about retrospectives. So there are lots of opportunities. Plans for Retrospectives actually is a great website because you can go there and you say, I'm going to do a retrospective, and you hit the button and it's like all the dials spin and it comes out with a 1 set the stage, 1 gather data. And I use it all the time. I almost never do what comes up. But it's a great way to sort of stimulate my thinking about, well, why wouldn't that work for this team? And then that tells me what would, right? So it has actually cut my retrospective planning time by about 20%. Liberating Structures is a set of activities that are really focused on complex systems. McCarthy Show is the core protocols. The one-word check-in and perfection game, some of those things very much can apply in retrospectives. Fun Retrospectives is a list of activities. Retrospectivewiki.org has a list of activities. There are 2 online groups. The Yahoo group, Retrospectives, that you can get to by retrospectives-subscribe at yahoogroups.com, and there's a LinkedIn group for retrospectives. So there's lots of help. Both of those groups are very generous. When people write in for questions, they always get multiple responses and multiple helpful responses. You know, the nice thing about retrospectives is everybody knows that we want to move away from the idea of blaming people to really looking at the systemic issues and fixing those, right? So you almost never get flamed on these because people are helpful, right? They want you to succeed. So, and here's the question that we always get. So what about distributed teams? Can't get everybody in a room, Well, there are resources. And one really good one is the innovation games, which are online ways that you can have everybody come together and participate in a thing. Two or three of the activities that I've developed have been turned into innovation games. I prefer not to lead retrospectives for distributed teams because I just think distributed teams are a bad idea, but I know some of us are stuck with them. So the issue is, Alistair Coburn told us a long time ago that the richest form of communication is two people face to face in front of a whiteboard. So when you have a distributed team, you bring to bear all of the resources, all the tools, all the techniques you can find that get you as close as you can possibly get to two people face to face in front of a whiteboard, which is not all the way there, but doing the best you can, right? So innovation games is one source. There are other similar kinds of things out there. I've noticed that some of the online services that do online meetings, like Lucid Meeting and some of the others, are beginning to create some retrospective templates. So you can check out whether those are any good. I haven't looked at all of them, so I can't really say. Bonnie, do you have a...
Yeah, I've used just like a mind map, like a
mind mapping, yeah.
that's there, that because you can have everybody adding things as you
Yeah.
go, so that like it's basically a very similar process to adding cards.
Yeah.
And then as soon as you call a time, and
Yeah.
then, all right,
Right.
that's pretty good, and then
Yeah, and there are services like Stickies.io that aren't really specifically for retrospectives, but you can kind of retrofit them for that. So, what's your plan? I'm going to be here through lunchtime or so tomorrow. I have to get in my ride to the airport at about 12:30. But if you have any other questions that you want to ask or comments, I would love to have those conversations. And another great resource for people who want to do retrospectives is this book, The Quick Start Guide to 5 Rules of Accelerated Learning, which is a LeanPub book. You can find it at leanpub.com/5rules, I think. And it is really about how do you set the conditions for maximum learning for individuals and teams. And so that's a whole other talk, so I'm not going to go into that. But it is a very useful resource, and I find myself now going through that model in practically every room I'm in. And I did a bunch of that here. So thank you very much.